I want to talk about Nicki Minaj's cousin's friend's swollen testicles. And I bet you weren't expecting me to open with that, were you? Full disclosure at the outset, I'm only vaguely aware of Nicki Minaj's existence. I mean, I've heard the name before, and I know she's some vapid celebrity who's a rapper or a singer or something or other. Very popular with the youngsters, apparently, but that is where my familiarity begins and ends. And if you're not up to speed on this story, which remarkably has been one of the biggest news stories in the country these past 2 or 3 days, Nicki Minaj did a very, very bad thing. Because when you're a vapid celebrity, you are never allowed to speak publicly against the strictures and the orthodoxies of the current state religion, which of course is woke leftist identitarianism. And you're even more not allowed to make any public utterances against our other state religion, which is federal government policy regarding a certain Chinese flu virus from China. But Nicki decided she was going to hit the whole trifecta because when you do engage in heretical public wrongthink when you're a vapid celebrity, you're expected to act like a pathetic, groveling coward and to tearfully beg forgiveness of the Twitter rage mob and the fake news media. So Nicki Minaj, the other day, she sends out a tweet in which she claims that her cousin's friend from Trinidad, and I'm assuming it's a male friend if he's able to have swollen testicles, but I guess you never can be sure these days. Just days before he was scheduled to get married, he was administered the Kung Flu vaccine, the Fauci ouchie, if you will, whereupon his balls swelled up like a couple of grapefruits, which caused his fiancée to call off the wedding, so now the guy is stuck with the world's most severe case of blue balls and nobody to help him take care of it. And first of all, just as a brief aside before I finish setting the scene, I feel like this marriage probably would have been doomed from the outset if that's all it takes for the bride to call off the nuptials. But I digress. But that wasn't the part of the tweet that left the Twitter rage mob baying for Nicki Minaj's blood. It was the last part that did that. The part where she advised her fans to pray on it, do the research for themselves, and make their own decision about whether or not to get the vaccine. Now, as another brief aside, and again, I know absolutely nothing about Nicki Minaj, but if her fans don't refer to themselves as the Minaj-erie, I feel like that's a tremendous missed opportunity, but maybe they do, and I digress again. So Nicki Minaj makes the perfectly reasonable suggestion that people should make their own choices about the drugs they put in their bodies, rather than just to unconditionally obey the instructions of the government, and naturally, the Twitter rage mob immediately comes to claim her scalp, doing the 21st century digital equivalent of surrounding someone's house with torches and pitchforks and pointy hats. But the pointy hats are rainbow colored and they have the BLM logo on them, so they're totally not a hate group, guys. Heads began exploding all across the fake news media, and Joy Reid on MSNBC was the first to pile on. In fact, she decided this was such an important admonition that it called for turning on her fake urban accent, which I will not attempt to duplicate here because, not that I care about offending anybody, but because my fake black accent is not nearly as good as my fake New York accent or my fake Russian accent. Now, there were a couple of things I loved about this fake paroxysm of moral outrage from Joy Reid. The first was when she went out of her way to point out that Nicki Minaj has 22 million Twitter followers, while she, Joy Reid, only has 2 million, which just makes it sound like one of those deals where some YouTuber makes a video personally attacking a much more successful YouTuber, and they put that person's name in the video and that person's picture on the thumbnail because they're trying to poach some cheap views and ride that person's coattails rather than just making content that people actually want to watch. And she's doing it in this god-awful fake street accent. I think she even had the head swivel and the finger going at one point. And let's face it, folks, Joy Reid has about as much street cred as fucking Michael J. Fox. The other thing I loved was when she started going to the Our Community card. Like, Nicki, sister, how can you do this to our community? What community is that, Joy Reid? Multi-millionaire black media celebrities who live in all-white neighborhoods? Because here's a newsflash for you. At least Nicki Minaj can claim to have actually lived in black communities at some point during her life. You, Joy Reid, on the other hand, are the progeny of 2 foreign college professors. To get to your current station in life, you rode the same private school Ivy League pipeline that has traditionally produced most of our coastal media elites in this country. But what, we're supposed to call it social justice because you're a black chick instead of a white dude? We're supposed to pretend that you're a stakeholder in the black American experience even though you have a grand total of 0 American ancestors? Just because you turn on a nauseating fake accent for a couple minutes? You're embarrassing yourself, Joy Reid. Better go back to what you do best, which is nodding thoughtfully while other multi-millionaire professional race hustlers talk about how much they agree with whatever stupid load of bullshit you just finished vomiting out. And Tony Fauci got in on the act too, naturally, because being on television 28 hours a day every day is Tony Fauci's job. He was on hand over on CNN to personally debunk the swollen testicle theory. You know, Jake, there's really no biological mechanism where the testicles could have become swollen from having taken the vaccine. Now, the way these things normally go, the celebrity who said the bad thing, they're mocked and ridiculed for a day or two, and then they come out with the obligatory statement that says, I am so sorry for the pain I've caused, and I promise to educate myself and do better in the future. Then they do a series of interviews on the fake news networks where they engage in performative displays of public self-flagellation, and then eventually the woke identitarian mafia decides, okay, we've had our fun, you can go back to being in the club now. Except Nicki Minaj, to her eternal credit, said the hell with that. I'm not playing your stupid game. Y'all can go get fucked. I'm not going to live in a world where I have to grovel like a bitch and apologize just for saying people should make their own choices about their own medical treatment. And good for her, because if this madness is ever going to stop, it's going to have to be vapid celebrities with tens of millions of followers who lead the way. Someone like Nicki Minaj has the power to remove more bricks from that wall far beyond what any conservative or libertarian commentator can do. But having said that, to the people on the right who are trying to make a cause celeb out of this person like she's some new hero of conservatism, just please stop. You're just making fools of yourselves. She's still a vapid celebrity. She's still a woke leftist. She just said one smart thing and had the courage not to take it back. And that is all. Jim Eagle informs me that her most well-known song is a 3.5-minute ode to freakishly large penises. And while he hits the music, I'm going to ask him why he knows that. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where freakishly large testicles are the rule rather than the exception, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And do you remember in last Friday's episode when I was talking about that strange feeling that you get in the pit of your stomach when the realization hits you that you're now living in a tin pot, third world banana republic? You know what else can cause that feeling? When your country's highest ranking general starts going into business for himself, starts freelancing, starts assuming the powers of the presidency unto himself, starts ignoring the orders and the stated directives of his own commander-in-chief, starts calling up the commander of your number one nuclear-armed geopolitical adversary and having a nice heart-to-heart about what good buddies they are, and starts promising our enemy that he personally will provide them with advance warning of any hostile action that our president might decide to undertake against them. And what's the moral of this story? Well, for starters, I guess I did that last Mark Milley video about 10 days too soon. But then, back then, we thought he was just a bumbling, incompetent boob who was too busy trying to memorize the fashionable woke platitudes of the day to conduct an orderly withdrawal from Afghanistan in which over a dozen of our servicemen and women got killed and in which untold hundreds or thousands of Americans were abandoned to the predations of the world's most evil, barbarous, bloodthirsty terrorists. Well, we decided instead to fill up a bunch of airplanes with child rapists and violent jihadis. It doesn't matter. Just fill up those airplanes with anybody, and then we can brag to the press about how we just did the biggest airlift in U.S. history. Don't ask any questions, damn you. These orders are coming straight from the White House. Wait, what's that you say? This narrative, it's not having the desired effect? The people back home are upset that this thing has gone completely tits up, and a dozen Marines and a Navy corpsman have been sacrificed on the altar of Joe Biden's personal hubris? Well, I guess we better blow up 7 innocent children and their parents and then tell the press that it was 2 ISIS commanders we killed. That'll get these vultures off our backs, right? It would be bad enough. It would make him the worst general in the history of the U.S. Army. It would be ample cause for his removal or resignation if that was all Mark Milley had done. But it would seem we were giving him entirely too much credit 10 days ago, because it is much, much, much worse than all that. Now, I should preface this next part by saying we still don't have official confirmation of the actions of which General Milley stands accused. I am very hesitant, as any citizen journalist ought to be, to take any anonymously sourced information from a Bob Woodward book at face value. Woodward has built an entire career and a fairly ample fortune. He's still eating free lunches up and down the eastern seaboard on having broken one story in 1974. And it's a story he broke not because of any exceptional reportage on his part, but because the source, formerly known as Deep Throat, later revealed to be Mark Felt, happened to choose him as the reporter to whom he leaked the information that broke open the Watergate scandal. But at least Woodward is a less pathetic figure than Carl Bernstein, who still gets propped up in front of the camera each time there's any political scandal involving a Republican and gets paid probably $50,000 each time he repeats the phrase, "worse than Watergate." Reportedly, this arrangement was lucrative enough that he managed to pay the college tuition for all of his grandkids during the 4 years Trump was in office. But if the anonymously sourced allegations against Milley in the forthcoming book from Woodward and his junior partner Bob Acosta, if these wind up being true, then it's not overstating things to say that Benedict Arnold has now lost the title of most traitorous general in the history of the U.S. Army. Benedict Arnold was a brigadier general, a field commander, who agreed to surrender West Point to the British in exchange for £20,000 and a commission as a major general in His Majesty's Army. It would be about $4 million today. But we have never in our entire history had a general at the chief of staff level who was accused of breaking the chain of command and dealing directly with a foreign adversary on his own. I'm going to repeat this because the severity of it cannot be overstated. General Mark Milley stands credibly accused of assuming the powers of the presidency unto himself. And it's no hyperbole to state that men have found themselves swinging from the end of a rope for a hell of a lot less serious acts of treason than that. If the chain of command is no longer sacrosanct, if our own top generals feel more loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party than they do to the President of the United States, then we have no country. Could you picture General Maxwell Taylor calling up Fidel Castro in January of '61 saying, "Hey Fidel, you and I are good buddies, so I just wanted you to know that our idiot Democrat president is going to try to depose you. The invasion's going to happen at the Bay of Pigs. It begins at 0500 tomorrow morning." And it sounds shocking, doesn't it? Well, Mark Milley stands accused of calling up the Chinese communists and pledging to do that exact same thing should similar circumstances arise. And no American should be remotely okay with that. Our national defense has become a farcical pantomime if things like that are allowed to happen without any consequence or any recrimination. At an absolute minimum, if what is alleged is actually true, Milley should be removed from command, his security clearance stripped, dishonorable discharge, and he should spend the rest of his natural-born life in a 6x8 cell at Fort Leavenworth. That is the more lenient penalty for a military man who is found guilty of treason. The maximum penalty involves the aforementioned rope, because military men who make traitors of themselves are not entitled to the dignity of a firing squad. Milley should have been removed from command over a month ago, just over the Afghanistan thing, even before he decided to murder a family of 8 with a Hellfire missile because his boss needed some good headlines in the papers. But the corpse of Joe Biden says he has complete confidence in General Milley. Really, Joe? Is that your final answer? Are you sure you don't want to use a lifeline or phone a friend or anything? Because first, it's pretty remarkable that this man is, ostensibly at least, the President of the United States. But this was the first time he has answered a question from a member of the press in over 20 days. Because the people who run this administration have decided that it's a no-win scenario to have the president make any public statements except the ones that he mumbles off the teleprompter. So he simply is never made available for questions anymore. The members of the press corps have to just shout questions across the room at him and hope they get some sort of a response. And for the first time in 3 weeks, he chooses to express complete confidence in a general who, in the best case scenario, is the most shockingly incompetent ignoramus ever to occupy the position of chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and in the worst-case scenario is the most traitorous bastard in the history of the U.S. Armed Forces. So I can't imagine Joe gave it very much thought before he shouted out that response about Milley having his full confidence. Because what message does that send, Joe? This man is your top military advisor. His one and only job is giving you the best advice he can on matters of armed conflict. So when you express your full and complete confidence in him, then you are implicitly saying that it's perfectly okay for a man in his position to go rogue, to ignore the authority of his commander-in-chief. And that's you, Joe, by the way, in case you forgot, and to deal directly with our enemies in any manner he sees fit. And look, yeah, I know Joe has a habit of forgetting that he's actually the president and is actually the man in charge, but my God, man, if we have generals at the chief of staff level who are freelancing and assuming the powers of the presidency unto themselves, and make no mistake, that is what this is, then not only do we have no functioning chain of command, but we have no government and no country. We are no better than a third world shithole banana republic if these charges are true and Milley is allowed to remain in his job. And it begs the question, with the astounding levels of corruption and incompetence that we've seen in the DOD, the State Department, the CDC, up and down the entire national government, what would it actually take for somebody to get fired by the corpse of Joe Biden? Better yet, is there any degree of open collaboration with the Chinese communists that would cause any ass clown in this administration to lose his job? Because I grew up during the Cold War, and I don't ever remember our generals, when the president was out of the room, picking up the red telephone, calling up Moscow, and saying, "Don't worry, Vladimir, if this unhinged former Hollywood actor tries to launch a sneak attack, I will be sure and warn you guys ahead of time." Also, I had great fun when I came over to your dacha for chess and vodka, and I'm looking very much forward to the next time, since we are such very close personal friends, you and me. It's also worth noting that there was no official denial of the charges against General Milley from the Department of Defense spokesman. Instead, shockingly, horrifyingly, there was what sounded a lot like a tacit admission that it was all true. The spokesman stated, quite matter-of-factly, that this was all perfectly routine. It's totally normal for the highest-ranking U.S. general to circumvent the chain of command, to assume the powers of the presidency unto himself, and to communicate directly with the commander of our number one geopolitical adversary. And honestly, I can't decide whether I want this to be a lie or the truth, because either way, it's really, really a terrible thing that should send a cold chill down the spine of every single American. If it's true that it's perfectly normal and mundane for our generals to operate outside the chain of command and deal directly with our foreign adversaries, then civilian control of the armed forces is a myth and a farce. And so by extension, the Constitution itself is a myth and a farce, because civilian control of the armed forces is one of the most basic elemental cornerstones of our entire system of government. And conversely, if it's a lie, then that means we have a Department of Defense that thinks it can placate the populace by saying what this guy said, that this is somehow what the American people want to hear, that we have no chain of command, that the president is just a guy in a suit who waves to the cameras and has no real power over anything, and the actual rulers of your country are unelected generals and unelected bureaucrats who wield inscrutable power, who are not subject to removal by a vote of the people. And when you complain about their corruption and malfeasance, they just laugh at you because you can't touch them. And that's where we are now, in a third world banana republic called the United States of America, where democratic self-government is just a quaint relic of a bygone age. Have a pleasant weekend. See you Monday. Do not comply. Don't let these bastards defeat us. Stand up for what you know is right. Rage against the dying of the light, and get off my lawn.